Good day, everyone. My name is Francis Ezequiel C. Nunez, your guide for today's journey back in time to the contemporary period of 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world. Philippine literature in different languages kept growing, especially when new novels came out during the martial law and when serious literature came back in the 1960s and 1970s. Poetry, short stories, novellas, novels, and essays continue to be written by Filipino authors, whether they are about societal dreams, gender, or race. Now let's talk about the 5 sub-periods of the contemporary period. The period of activism from 1970 to 1972. Between the 1970 and 1972, youth activism was motivated by domestic and international problems. Because of society's faults, youngsters are motivated to seek improvements. Many teenage activists and rebel authors were imprisoned in military camps. As early as this period in history, we can declare that many of the imprisoned writers were real patriots and historical heroes. Rizal's assertion that young people are the hope of the nation is still applicable today. In 1972, martial law was declared as the results of the seed of activism planted by Lapu-Lapu, Lacambini, and Rizal. Some people might say that only young people in the Philippines rebel against the people in charge. Pineda also said that this was the time that the youth once more proved that it is not the constant evasion that shapes our race and nationalism. There is a limit to one's patience. It may explode like a volcano if overstrained. What will it be like if one is a coward who does not take a stand for himself and for the succeeding generations? During this period, there is something that we call the literary revolution, to where they held pens and wrote on placards in red paint the equivalent of the word makibaka or to dare. Some of those who rallied in this form of literature were Rolando Tino, Rogelio Mangahas, Efren Abuey, Rio Alma, and Clemente Bautista. The irreverence of the poor reached its peak during this period of the mass revolution. It was also during this period where bomba films that discredited our ways as Filipinos started to come out. Let's tackle about the second sub-period of the contemporary period, which is the period of the new society from 1972 to 1980. The Carlos Palanca Awards continue to be in the revival of classic plays such as Sinakolo, Zarzuela, and Embayoka of the Muslims. The singing of both Filipino and English songs was rewarded. The weekly journals Kislap and Liwayway contributed significantly to the growth of literature. During this period, most poems' themes were patience, respect for native culture and customs, and the beauty of nature and surroundings. In 1977, the Tales of Manuhu, a new style of rock opera, were also added to these presentations. A play entitled Sining Imbayoka was put on by the Mindanao State University. The President's Daughter played the main role in both Santa Juana of Coral and The Diary of Anne Frank. Popular television plays were Gulong ng Palad, Flor de Luna, and Annalisa, while Superman and Tarzan were popular among teenagers. Radio continued to be patronized during this period, but many performing artists moved from radio to TV because of higher pay. Filipino films were shown in all theaters in Metro Manila during the 1950s and 1960s. A yearly Pista ng Pelikulang Pilipino, or in English, Yearly Filipino Film Festival, was held during this period. New kinds of films without sex and romance started to be made but were nevertheless well received by the public. During this period of the new society, newspapers adopted new forms. People were more interested in the news about economic growth, discipline, culture, tourism, and other similar topics than in sensationalized stories about murders, rapes, and robberies. The leading papers during this period were Bulletin Today, Times Journal, People's Journal, Balita, Filipino Express, Philippine Daily Express, Evening Post, and Evening Express. Now let's plunge ourselves in the period of the Third Republic, which is the third sub-period of the contemporary period. The Third Republic, martial rule, was lifted on January 2, 1981, and former President Ferdinand Marcos called it the New Republic of the Philippines. During this time, it's impossible to deny that the continued oppression and repression led many people to rebel and protest. This stage of the nation's history had its effect on our literature. After Benigno Aquino was assassinated, the people's voices could no longer be contained. Poems during this period of the Third Republic were romantic and revolutionary. Writers wrote openly about their criticism of the government. People were taught to use angry, colorful, violent, profane, and insulting language to their prayers. Many Filipino songs dealt with themes that were really true to life, like those grief, poverty, aspirations for freedom, love of God, country, and fellow men. The yearly festival of Filipino films continued to be held during this period. People's love for sex films also remains unabated. Many producers took advantage of this at the expense of public morality. The death of Philippine President Benigno Aquino Jr., people were shocked and horrified by how quickly and unexpectedly things had happened. Poets, surprisingly, by common consent, found themselves writing on a common subject. The themes of most of the literature this time dealt with courage, shock, and grief over the treachery inflicted upon Aquino. There is something that we call the Jaja movement, or the Justice for Aquino, Justice for All movement, which called for a boycott of the government-controlled newspapers. People picketed newspapers' offices with coffins to symbolize the death of press freedom. On campuses, newspapers were set afire to protest the lack of freedom of expression. It was a year full of libel charges, lawsuits, and seditious trials which journalists bravely took as harassment suits. Now let's talk about the fourth sub-period of the contemporary period, which is named Period, from 1986 to 1999. In the span of 4 days from February 21 to 25 in 1986, the so-called people power or lakas ng bayan prevailed. Together, the people barricaded the streets, petitioning the government for changes and reforms. Philippine society was in turmoil for weeks, but rejoicing after the President Marcos was toppled from power was sheer euphoria. Newspapers, which were once branded crony newspapers, became instant opposition papers overnight. This was true of Bulletin Today, which became the opposition paper. The Inquirer, Malaya, and People's Journal, all of which are now owned by the same people, saw their readership jump overnight. Filipino songs were also frequently broadcast on radio and television, and they frequently accompanied historical events in the Philippines. An album named Handog ng Pilipino sa Mundo carried a compilation of some of these. The song that continued to be sung throughout the trying period of the revolution was Bayan Ko, wherein its lyrics were written by Jose Corazon de Jesus way back in 1928. And the final sub-period of the contemporary period is 21st century literature to present. 21st century literature is a new literary work. It was created in the last decade. Its imaginative writing deals with current issues and reflects technological culture, frequently deviates from traditional writing, and traces artistic representation of shared and familiar experiences. And that marks the end of our discussion. Thank you for lending me your ears and have a wonderful day.